I am sorry it took me so long to do my duty.
The Wheel of Time Season 2 Episode 7 is called Daes Dae'mar, which means the Great Game. And true to the title, many characters were playing games, manipulating events, and pushing our main cast of characters towards Falme. A lot of loose threads in the pattern of the story were tightened and resolved in this fast-paced episode, with even more threads being put in place for what I hope will be an epic season finale. Let's unravel the episode to make sense of it all. This is Unraveling the Pattern. I'm Lauren. This video is safe for show watchers and non-book readers, but please check the description for a detailed spoiler warning. Let's start at the end. In a very unexpected turn of events, Siuan was left bleeding on the ground while Moiraine looked down on her. Moiraine's ability to channel had been restored. Rand, Lan, and Moiraine followed Lanfear of all people into a waygate, presumably to go to Falme. I will say this shocked me and many book readers so much that I've seen many wild theories trying to justify these major changes from the books. There are a few prevailing theories about what happened. The first theory says that what we saw on screen should be taken at face value, and for some reason, Siuan and Moiraine kind of broke up, as they were essentially choosing very different sides in relation to how to handle the Dragon Reborn. Siuan seemed to think she had enough political sway in the tower to shield the dragon, take him into custody, cage him as tower law dictates, and to then only bring him out at parties, or to use him as a puppet until the last battle. If this is true, Siuan seems to think that Moiraine was lying to her about being stilled, and then Siuan witnessed Moiraine cooperating with one of the Forsaken to take the dragon away. This makes Moiraine look like she's a member of the Black Aja who can not only break her oath to lie, but works with the Forsaken. This will set up Siuan for some awkward discussions with the Hall of the Tower, which will likely lead to some very uncomfortable moments in Siuan's future. The second popular theory is some variation of the following. Siuan and Moiraine have been planning this for quite some time together, and they were playing everyone, including Rand, the Tower, and the audience, in a great game of manipulation. Other variations say that perhaps Moiraine wasn't totally involved, but that Lan and Siuan planned some of this. Some theories think that they were even trying to trick Lanfear, while others say that Lanfear's involvement was not expected and put a big old wrench in their plans. As a book reader, I want this second theory to be true in some way, simply because I don't like the idea that Siuan and Moiraine, after 20 long years of working together and keeping each other's secrets, suddenly changed their plans and turned against each other. Remember, they're in the most political city in the world, and we've seen evidence of people listening in on conversations and even using regular people and guards as eyes and ears for their own political gain. And yet we see Rand openly talking to Lan about calling himself the dragon in a hallway in front of tower guards. Later, Rand says to Siuan that Lan told him she's not exactly what she seems. Is this a nod to the audience that we shouldn't take Siuan's actions at face value in this episode? The term Daes Dae'mar, which is the title of the episode, literally means the Great Game, which normally refers to the Game of Houses, a similar concept to the Game of Thrones, but Robert Jordan came up with the Game of Houses first. In my review of this episode, I said I was disappointed that we didn't see more of the Game of Houses from the books. In Book 2, Rand burns letters from various lords and ladies, and through a series of accidents, he becomes a major player in the political climate in Cairhien. He leaves the city in political turmoil. We really didn't see much of that in the show, other than some minor bits of politics between Rand, Anver, and her son Barthanes. However, it occurred to me that the title Daes Dae'mar isn't really referring to the Game of Houses, but rather to the Great Game in general, a bigger picture version of political manipulation, intrigue, and smokescreens. In the books, we learn that while Cairhien is the most deeply entrenched in the Great Game, really the Aes Sedai created the game, and among the Aes Sedai, Moiraine is one of the very best at playing it. So through that lens, it's not too difficult to believe that Moiraine and Siuan were planning for some of this. They'd been writing letters to each other for 6 months. Moiraine confirmed that she influenced Rand from afar to get him to meet with Loghain in Cairhien to help him learn to channel. I'm guessing Siuan was very much involved in getting Loghain to Cairhien as well. In Season 1, when Siuan and Moiraine were alone together, they let their walls down and truly seemed happy. Only when Moiraine was in front of the Amyrlin with the rest of the Hall of the Tower did Siuan treat her like a disobedient daughter. This first scene between Siuan and Moiraine in this episode seemed more intimate. Siuan says, "I've let you carry this burden for 20 years, love. You've given everything for it. From here on out, I row beside you." And yet in the next scene with Moiraine and Siuan, with Lan and Rand in the background, Siuan speaks to Moiraine as if she's punishing her in front of the Hall of the Tower. Perhaps Siuan is only trying to make it look as though she's following Tower law in order to look good for the Hall of the Tower, while also giving Moiraine a way to manipulate Rand into trusting her more fully. As you rewatch this scene, imagine that someone is listening in on their conversation, in the same way that we saw Anver listening in on Barthanes and Liandrin. It feels very much like they're putting on a show for Rand and for eavesdropping Aes Sedai. Moiraine clearly states their purpose. She says, "We each had a task, Swan. I was to find the Dragon Reborn. You were to get the tower ready to support him. Support him, not cage him." Now would be a good time to talk about the opening scene. We finally learned more about what changed Moiraine and what set her and Swan on their course to find the Dragon Reborn 20 years ago. Bells were tolling in the city to celebrate the end of the Aiel War, but little did Swan and Moiraine know, the bells also seemed to herald in the birth of the Dragon Reborn. The birth of this baby would change the course of Swan and Moraine's lives for better or worse, but it would change the world even more, especially if they did not find the dragon before the Dark One did. Moiraine and Swan were so happy and carefree, but it all fell apart when they overheard a prophecy, or foretelling, from an older blind Aes Sedai named Gitara Moroso, who saw a vision of the birth of the Dragon Reborn on Dragonmount. Gitara's foretelling was so strong that she died after seeing the vision. This set Moiraine and Swan on a secret mission to find the baby that was born on the mountain. True to their Aja, the Blue, they dedicated their lives and sacrificed so much for a cause that they felt was bigger and more important than their personal hopes and dreams. Knowing this makes this scene from Season 1 even more meaningful. In a way, Swan is not speaking to Nynaeve and Egwene, she's speaking to younger versions of herself and Moiraine when she says, "I know what it is to feel you deserve something different than what this life gives you, to wonder why you couldn't just stay at home, love the people you love, grow old with them, protect them, support them, threads weaving in and out of the pattern without consequence." But the truth is, the two of you have been called to greatness. The fate of all of us rests on you now, on the decisions you make in the coming days, on the strength you find within. Later she says, "The wheel does not care if you are young or afraid, petty or weak. It certainly doesn't care what you want. The wheel calls you to this, whether you can bear it or not. The last battle is coming. What any of us wants now is meaningless. The only thing that matters is what you do." Despite the fact that Moiraine was raised as a lady in Cairhien and knew how to truly play the great game, she went out into the world to find the dragon, while Swan, a humble fisherman's daughter with no privilege or political experience, climbed the tower's corporate ladder and eventually made her way into the highest position in the tower and in the world and became the Amarlin seat. After 20 long years, Moiraine finally found the dragon, but she'd become so good at keeping secrets that she didn't even share all of her ideas with her warder or with Swan. Now, in Cairhien, surely Swan and Moiraine knew there was no stopping the weaving of the pattern, that Rand would soon become known to the world as the Dragon Reborn. Of course they wanted to protect themselves and their carefully laid plans to guide the dragon and the world towards the last battle. Even Lanfear and Ishamael seem to have made plans for Rand to declare himself the Dragon Reborn in Falme. Only problem is, the wheel weaves as the wheel wills. In other words, things don't always go according to people's plans, but they do tend to always have a way of working themselves out for what is best for the world. This must be so frustrating for Swan and for Moiraine, and for Ishamael or Lanfear for that matter, who want to carefully control every little thing. Logain said that Moiraine was a desperate and lonely woman who's given her life to a cause beyond her understanding. Moiraine truly has given everything for her mission. Anvere was right when she said, Moiraine knows the difference between right and wrong and how much harder it is sometimes to do what is right. Moiraine gave up her happy and quiet life with Swan as a fishwife to instead suffer greatly in order to hopefully help to save the world. But she's in too deep and doesn't fully know what she's gotten herself into, as Logain suggested. And Moiraine has mistakenly taken her burden upon herself without allowing others to help. I love that Moiraine got so much support from so many people in this episode. Not only did Swan tell her that she would row by her side, but we saw Lan stepping up and doing his duty to help her, and we saw Verin and Alana and her warders all working to help her as well. I loved hearing Alana say, "You're not alone in this any longer, sister." Moiraine doesn't have to do it alone. For the first time, Moiraine seemed to finally trust others. We even saw her smile, which we really haven't seen at all this season. I love that Moiraine said to Rand, "I trust you." This is some major character growth for her, and then she literally and metaphorically opened her heart to let Rand in so that he could remove her shield to restore her power. How cool is that? Let's talk about Moiraine's shield for a minute. I originally wrote about 4 pages going in depth about the different ways in which a person can be cut off from the one power, but there's just too much else to talk about, so I'll have to save that for another video. But to help clarify, yes, there are many ways in which a person can be cut off from the one power. If you're a book reader, keep in mind that I'm oversimplifying all of this for show watchers, and I'm leaving out obvious future book spoilers. There's shielding, severing, also known as stilling for women or gentling for men, and being burned out. Shielding is temporary, while gentling or stilling and being burned out are permanent. The Aes Sedai in the show use shields made of weaves of spirit to temporarily cut off someone from the one power. This was visualized as a sort of cage-like shape in Season 1, and it was changed slightly to look more like a group of weaves centered around the person's chest in Season 2. but the Aes Sedai thought that the shield had to be constantly maintained. In season 1 of the show, when Logain was captured, 3 or more Aes Sedai were required to maintain his shield. This caused great strain on the women. Later in season 2, we saw Liandrin was able to shield Nynaeve by herself, but it also caused great strain on Liandrin. Rand, who is supposed to be more powerful than Logain and Nynaeve, was easily shielded by just one Aes Sedai, first by Swan, and later by Lyanna Sedai, and after that Varen Sedai, who let Rand free from his shield eventually. There's been some confusion about how one person could shield Rand, but this was explained in a roundabout way. Swan asked Rand how many times he had channeled, and he said not many, not deliberately. In other words, Rand was inexperienced, and Logain had years of learning weaves. Logain pushed against the shield and was even able to break out of it. Eventually, with time and practice, Rand should be able to do the same thing. However, the more people there are maintaining the shield, the more difficult it is to break free. Even 6 or 7 of the weakest Aes Sedai together can easily maintain a near unbreakable shield around the strongest channeler. Severing, also known as gentling or stilling, is permanent. Not only are they cut off from the one power, but their ability to channel is sort of surgically removed. That's what was done to Logain in season 1. So what exactly happened to Moiraine? At the end of season 1, Ishamael was so powerful that he was easily able to shield Moiraine by himself, but he used a special trick from the Age of Legends that has long since been lost to the Aes Sedai. Ishamael didn't just shield Moiraine, he tied the weaves of spirit in a knot that was maintained without him needing to be there. This was clearly shown when his hands made a sort of knot and Moiraine reacted as though she was hurt. The tying off of the shield did cut off Moiraine from the one power in a temporary but semi-permanent way, but it did not remove her ability to channel. She could have had the knot untied or cut off had she known about it, but only male channelers can see the weaves of other male channelers, just as only female channelers can see female weaves. Once Lan got confirmation from Logain that there were male weaves around Moiraine, he was able to guide Rand to see those weaves, and Rand was able to cut the knotted shield away from Moiraine, restoring her access to the One Power. This was, I think, an intentional nod to an ancient Greek legend about Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot. According to Wikipedia, the legend was regarding a complex knot that tied an ox cart. Reputedly, whoever could untie it would be destined to rule all of Asia. Instead of untangling it laboriously as expected, Alexander the Great dramatically cut through it with his sword, thus exercising another form of mental genius. I'll be honest, I was disappointed that Swan was not involved in some way with this discovery. I thought for sure that they were foreshadowing Swan's involvement with untying Moiraine's shield, because when we first saw Swan in season 1 in this flashback, she channeled to untie a knot for her father. And then later, when Swan and Moiraine were together in their fishing hut, Swan was working on tying or untying a net. The shield that Ishamael placed on Moiraine looked like a tied net. I mentioned in my review of this episode that I was disappointed that Swan didn't help to untie Moraine's shield, but I didn't necessarily expect her to see the weaves and untie it herself. I just hoped that she would be the one to help Rand to untie it in some way. It was still satisfying to see Rand cut the knot and restore Moraine's access to the One Power. One other quick thing to note, when someone is shielded and or when they are severed, they can still sense the One Power, but they cannot access it. This is why women who are stilled or men who are gentled often take their own lives. They can still feel the presence of the light, but they can no longer touch it. Imagine the mental agony that would cause, like being thirsty and seeing pure water running right in front of you, but never being able to drink it again. When Lan was trying to help Moiraine, he found records of only 2 women in history in the tower who were cut off from the One Power who did not end their own lives. He asked Moiraine if she felt at any time in the last few months like she wanted to take her own life, and she said, "No, I didn't, not for 1 second. Then Lan smiled. Now, the last thing I want to do is trivialize the concept of self-harm or mental issues that lead to someone taking their own life. This is a very serious subject, and I hope that if you're watching this and you have feelings of depression that could lead to self-harm or a desire to take your own life, that you will seek immediate help. In the US, you can text or call 988 for help. Please seek help. You are wanted and loved, even if you don't feel like you are. Suicide is not the answer. Outside of the US, please Google Suicide Hotline to find someone to whom you can reach out. What I will say is that when I first watched this scene with Lan, I was very pleased by how this was handled, because I saw this as someone who was just concerned for the well-being of their friend. I didn't see this as some sort of detective work that Lan was doing to prove a theory to himself that perhaps Moiraine wasn't stilled after all, but only shielded. To me, it trivializes this complex subject a bit if we look at this scene through the lens of Lan just doing some detective work. When Lan smiled after Moiraine confirmed to him that she never thought about taking her own life, I saw this as a loving gesture from a deeply concerned friend who was relieved to hear that she was safe from herself. After all, she could not lie because of the 3 oaths. And seeing Lan smile made me tear up a bit because he truly cares about Moiraine, despite the fact that she had been treating him terribly. I love this because it shows how a real friend should act around someone with mental health issues. That being said, if this was just Lan following a hunch, I'm kind of okay with this too, because Moiraine did say that she never thought about hurting herself. But the important line here from Moiraine is that she says she didn't think about it because protecting Rand, guiding him, that is the only thing that matters. More than me, more than you, more than anything. We learn in the books that one of the only ways for someone who is permanently cut off from the source to survive is to give themselves an important reason or mission to keep living. In Moraine's case, she feels that helping the Dragon Reborn to stop the Dark One is a cause worth continuing to live for. So I believe that even if Moiraine had been stilled, this would have still been her answer. Her mission is more important to her than her own life, and she is willing to give her life for the cause if necessary, but she would never take her own life. As long as she's breathing, she will do what she can to protect the world. Moiraine, though possibly misguided, is very noble to me and is another example of a true Aes Sedai, or servant of all. And as I said, she seems to have finally learned to open her heart to others. It seems that Rand is learning some of the same lessons. Lan mentioned that Rand was not thinking clearly when he pushed his friends away. Rand said, "I left to protect the people I love." And Lan responded by saying, "Don't be so selfish. You were born to protect this world, every person in it, not just the ones you love." Lan's implying that pushing people away, something he's had quite a bit of experience with lately from Moiraine, is not helpful to anybody. We need each other. Rand told Swan he was tired of being a spoke in the wheel, but Swan told him he's so much more than a spoke. He's the water that turns the wheel itself or dashes it to pieces. As I've said before, Rand is tied to the Wheel of Time itself. They've been clear about this season. His choices have more impactful consequences than anybody else in the world. If the dragon breaks, the world could break. If the dragon accepts his duty as Lan told him to when he said, "Whatever comes, face it on your feet," then perhaps Rand and the world can defeat the shadow. What if the wheel actually weaves as the dragon wills? In a way, I think Moiraine has come to accept that she is just a small thread caught in a torrent who can only surrender her will to the weaving of the great pattern. Moiraine knows what is right. The right thing to do is to team up with the Dragon Reborn, even if that means he's temporarily working with one of the Forsaken. I'm not sure that Swan wants to accept that. A third theory about this strange ending between Moiraine and Swan is that perhaps Swan was not in full control of herself the entire time. The show has been planting seeds about compulsion, a weave of the one power that gives a channeler control over others. We also know that Swan was manipulated in her dreams in Season 1. She was the one who had the dream about the Dark One supposedly growing weak at the Eye of the World, which eventually led to freeing Ishamael. Also, isn't it odd that Varen spent much of the episode trying to find a hidden waygate in the city with an old Ogier map, but then somehow Swan managed to go directly to the waygate to find Moiraine and Lan and Rand? How did Swan know where to go? Perhaps Lan and Moiraine and the other Aes Sedai had planned all of this with Swan, but it's also possible that Swan was not entirely in control of herself in the end. Now, at first I thought that maybe Liandrin had used compulsion on Swan, but I have a hard time believing that Liandrin is that powerful. To me, it feels very much like if Swan was not in full control, that either Ishamael or Lanfear, or the both of them together, were controlling some of Swan's choices. Swan's tone and actions in this scene at the Waygate seem completely contrary to everything she said or did in previous scenes. Swan told Moiraine in their first meeting that even the thought of bonding a warder against their will was a violation, and then she turned around and forced Moiraine to do something against her will when she told Moiraine to close the Waygate. I had to go back and listen to the wording of Moraine's unbreakable oath in Season 1. Among other things, she said, "I, Moiraine Sedai, do swear to honor and obey Swan Sanche." It was actually Moraine's choice to put all of her trust in Swan that eventually led to this sad moment where she was forced to obey. It was also strange that Swan was able to attack Lan with the One Power. That's borderline not possible, unless somehow Swan believed in her mind that she was not harming him, or if she is secretly Black Aja, or if perhaps she's not in full control. And then we saw Lanfear show up, and after she knocked Swan down, she said, "A broken armorlin is more useful to me than a dead one." This sounds very close to what Ishamael said about Moiraine back in episode 5. He said, "A dead Aes Sedai is useless." I like to think that Swan and Moiraine were putting on a bit of a show for the other Aes Sedai and for Rand, but that they didn't anticipate that Lanfear would show up to cause chaos. I think that Swan was not completely herself at this moment, and that when she was knocked to the ground, perhaps her compulsion was removed, and she realized at this moment that she had not been in control. This is my hope anyway. Otherwise, it's just too sad for me to accept that Swan and Moiraine are enemies. Oh boy, that was a lot of time spent on just Swan, Moiraine, and Rand, but there were so many other interesting things in this episode. We could talk about how Barthanes was outed as a dark friend, or how Varen expertly tricked Lyanna without outright lying, as any good Aes Sedai should, or how Alana's warder Maxim was admiring his own reflection in his sword blade. But let's jump to more important storylines, starting with Mat. First of all, who was this mysterious person who knocked Mat out? I personally love the theory that this was a gray man. In the books, a gray man is a type of shadow spawn, which is basically just a random person who literally gives up their soul to become a servant of the Dark One. Another name for them is the soulless. Gray men and gray women are so unremarkable that you couldn't pick them out in a lineup. I tried brightening up this shot and I can kind of make out what could be a beard, but I just can't be certain who this is, and honestly I like it that way. I will say it was a bit odd that Ivan, one of Alana's warders, followed Tomas, Varen's warder, later, and we never really saw what came of that. I don't like the idea that this man who knocked out Mat was Tomas, but I suppose anything's possible in the show. Tomas's clothing doesn't match this mysterious stranger's clothing, and Tomas told Moiraine and Lan, "Light be with you," so I personally have a hard time believing that Tomas did this, unless he too was under compulsion. Then there was this very jarring moment where, after all the buildup manipulating Min to try and get Mat to Kyrian and to try and get Rand and Mat to leave to Falm together, that suddenly Mat was just in Falm with no explanation, and when he asked how he got there, Lanfear said, "That's my little secret." It would be too spoilery to discuss this further, but I'm sure we'll learn more about Lanfear's secret as the show progresses. This does kind of put a hole in my theory that Lanfear and Ishamael are working together though, simply because it was Ishamael who was pushing Min and Mat to Rand, and then Lanfear just upped and brought Mat to Falm very suddenly. That said, it did feel like Ishii was okay with it. Maybe this was all part of the plan and it was really just a way to manipulate Mat by having Min betray him. Then Ishamael gave Mat the odd tea that caused Mat to see strange visions. I don't believe Ishii for 1 second when he tells Mat he's truly dark deep down, and I also don't believe that this tea actually shows people their past lives. I think this is just the father of lies at work. It probably did give Mat a bad acid or mushroom trip, or maybe it just made Mat sleepy and then Ishamael manipulated him in his dreams or something. I don't know, this wasn't in the books at all. Mat saw himself hanging from a rope, which could indicate foreshadowing or something that happened in a past life. But did you notice that for a brief moment, the people in the mirror were not Mat, but other people? There was a quick shot of a man who actually kind of looked like Perrin Fane to me, drowning someone in a bucket of water, but then it cut back and showed Mat doing the drowning. There was also a quick shot of another man who was stabbing a woman with a dagger. I can't tell if this is the cursed ruby-hilted dagger from Shadar Logoth, but the clothing that this man is wearing is reminiscent of some official book cover art of Mat, which I quite liked. So perhaps Mat really was seeing the darker parts of his past lives. Whatever really happened, I don't think that Mat will willingly work with Ishamael to hurt his friends. Perhaps this is all some big setup by Ishamael to trick Mat or manipulate him into somehow hurting his friends by accident. And then we have the amazing scenes with Perrin and the Aiel. I'm so glad we got to meet other Maidens of the Spear. Bane and Chiad are fan favorites. I don't want to get too deep into it, but basically the Aiel culture is very hung up on something called Ji Eto, which translates to mean honor and obligation. Aviendha claims it was her fault that their fellow maiden died, and so to pay for her mistake or to meet her obligation, and to restore her honor, or Ji, she willingly allowed her fellow spear sisters to beat her. I genuinely got teared up a bit during this moment, knowing just how important this is to Aviendha. I thought this was expertly handled without spending paragraphs of exposition to explain it the way that Robert Jordan did. I also love that we got to see our first look at Maiden Hand Talk, which is a sort of sign language that only the women Aiel warriors know and speak to each other. It was fun seeing the bewilderment on their faces when they saw all the water surrounding Falm. The Aiel can scarcely believe that much water could be gathered into one place because they're used to living in a very desolate land far to the east. And then there's Nynaeve and Elaine and what they did to this sul'dam, but we'll have to save that for the next episode, Unraveling. And finally, we only got a few moments with Egwene, but I loved every second of it. In my previous Unraveled video, I said that Egwene was broken at the end of episode 7, but I was wrong. Someone in my comments says she wasn't broken, she's being forged. I couldn't agree more. I loved seeing this angry spark in Egwene. Yes, she bent, but she did not break. I got chills when she told Rhenna, "I will kill you." I've mentioned this before, but Egwene's identity as a woman is tied directly to her hair and her braid. It was so great to see her taking her braid into her own hands and tying it. It felt to me like she was taking her womanhood and her control back. Well, it feels to me like all of the pieces are finally clicking into place for an epic season finale. But will they manage to tie it all together in a satisfying way? The wheel weaves as the wheel wills. Thanks for watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting respectfully. Until next time, let the dragon ride again on the winds of Prime.